the React.Context API. So what is new in React? With the advent or the inclusion of React 16.3, there's quite a few things that are actually affecting older versions of React quite drastically. There are new lifecycle methods, and some of the older lifecycle methods will be deprecated as well. There's a bunch of cool new things as well, but one of the coolest and sort of the hottest topic on the market today, if you will, is this idea of context. So, like, what is context? How is it used? Is kind of what we're going to go through today. So, if you look, and I'm going to make sure that I have my notes up side by side. So, just give me 1 second. So, if you look at the documentation, you'll find a really, really good example of what context is and what it does, and you'll find really good descriptions from React on this concept. So I'm just going to link that over in Zoom or in Slack, sorry, so you guys can all have the link that I'm looking at here. And then this code example that I will go through today, I'll also deploy it up to Code Sandbox, so you can have it forever. And just so that you know, a copy of this will be found. We'll record this, but this is also a talk that I'm going to be giving tonight at the Utah JS meetup in Salt Lake City. So if any of you are local to Utah, come say hi. I'll be giving this little presentation tonight, probably more polished and with slides. So you guys are like my guinea pigs going through it, and I'm certain that you are all more forgiving. And I know a lot of you a lot more. Those of you who don't know me, my name's Ryan Hamblin. I work on the web instruction team here at Lambda School. My primary responsibility is sort of the middle portion of your web fundamentals program. So when you get to me, you have already gone through the trenches with Josh and learned the fundamentals and the foundational stuff. And then I teach you all about React and single page applications and all that fun stuff. So that's where you'll get to meet me, is typically in like week 5 or so, okay? So let me pull up my notes real quick just to make sure that I don't ramble on, because those that know me know that I have a tendency to do so. I just want to make sure that I keep myself on track, okay? And once again, feel free to ask any questions. There are there's plenty of time for us to kind of go through what I want to go through and answer questions along the way. So that being said, it doesn't look like anyone has any major questions now. I'll just keep an eye on Slack as we continue to move through this stuff. So what is context? Context is a portion of the React API that allows us to sort of think about state and use state in React in a different way. Up until context, there really were sort of 2 kind of paradigms with state. The first paradigm being the stateful component. So we have our constructor, just like this, inside of our class, and we keep that state, got a super, right, on an object that looks like this. So this is sort of where we're going to be moving to today, is kind of learning about how we use this state in a way that we can basically pass this around our application through multiple components. Okay, and then the other paradigm was Redux or a Flux paradigm. So Redux, MobX, there's insert your state management library du jour, and you will have another way of managing state in your application. So if you look at, like, if you just Google Redux flow, or not flow, but like GIF. I believe it was Sean who put this material together for us. This little GIF shows you that we don't follow this paradigm with Redux. We take our state and we sort of keep our state outside of our application, okay? Outside of our components, I mean. So we take our state and we sort of put it at the top of our application, so to speak. And then our state flows through our components when we connect our components to our state using the connect function from a package that's called React Redux, okay? Now, these are sort of the 2 paradigms. And here's why these paradigms exist. State management comes to us with React, with the React API, the component API as it stands, okay? When we have state, we also have access to a function called setState, okay? Now, setState is a really unique part of the React API. It's how we actually make our updates in our React applications, okay? So when our component changes some data, or a user clicks on a button, we can call setState, and it's going to go and take a copy of our state and return a new version of that state. And instantly, this function right here, shortly after that, will cause this function to be invoked again. And because render is invoked again, we then get a new version of our DOM. And that's sort of how state works with vanilla React. With Redux, it's a whole different thing. We don't need to get into the details of that, but the concept here is generally the same, okay? So what we're going to do is we're going to build out sort of an application that passes state down, and we're going to kind of look at some of the clunkier portions of React and why something like Redux would exist. And then it's going to trigger our conversation into why something like context would exist. So what I'm getting at is we have state management in terms of our class components, and then we have state management in terms of a Flux paradigm like Redux, okay? Now, Redux is big. When we use Redux, Redux itself is a very simple API, but getting it boilerplated and put together inside of our React applications, there is some complication to that. There's some overhead, okay? And because of that, a lot of people loved that Redux sort of solved this state management problem for them that we're about to get into. And what happened is instantaneously people started flocking towards Redux. And they're like, if it's React, we have to use Redux with it. I was in the other camp where I was like, never Redux. There's rarely a case where you would need it. However, the rest of the world does not feel that way. And it's not totally true in terms of large development teams. I get the idea of Redux in terms of large development teams and large applications where state moves around a ton, okay? I know I've rambled a lot. I'm going to just kind of bust through some of this stuff real quick, and then and then we'll start actually coding. And so the idea is that context will sort of be sort of the middleman, where we don't have to reach for Redux automatically. We can think about our code and think about our applications and say, oh, if I need to achieve a Redux-like pattern, so to speak, or get some of the benefits of Redux, I don't have to reach for Redux just to include it for that one simple thing. I could potentially now just use the context API that's given to us, okay? All right, I talked a lot. I see that there's no questions, so we're just going to forge ahead, and you're probably like, why don't we just start coding? So that's kind of why we're all here, right? So what I'm going to do is I'm going to create a little app that's going to consume some data, okay? So the data that we want to have consumed is going to be sort of like, I don't know how to explain it. We'll just start with simple data. Okay, so this.state, our data is going to be a name, and we'll say Freddie, age equals 32. Cool. Freddie's 32 years old. Okay. Now let's say that we have a component that's going to consume this data. So we're going to say our person component, is going to consume our name. So name equals this.state.name. Age equals this.state.age. Okay, and this is good and all, just a single parent-to-child relationship. So I'm going to import person from this thing that doesn't exist yet, components/person.js, and we need to go create that file. And in here, we're going to create a folder called components and a file called person.js. Perons.js. Okay. All right, so if I have now this data and it's, sort of lives in my application at app level and it's gonna be passed down to person, it's more than likely that person could just be a stateless functional component. So I'm just gonna import React and call stateless functional component. Whoops, SFC, and we're gonna call this person.js, okay? Person itself is gonna receive our props and it's going to return a div with the h3 of the props.name, right? And an h4 of the props.age. And got to be interpolated, so I will put that in my curly braces. Cool, so now if I actually fire up my application, let me grab, I'll just do it right here in the terminal. And go grab yourself a drink of water. It takes forever. Not really, it's not that bad. Cool, so Freddie is our person. So Freddie is age 32. So if I say, hello, my name is Freddie, and let's just refactor this a little bit so we have a nice, fun, family-friendly message. I am years old. Cool. Get us some real estate here so that we don't run into everything. So awesome, Freddie is now our little person. Okay, this is super trivial, super small, easy conversation to have here. But let's say that we actually, our app grows and we start to use a lot more components. We want, we want more sophistication in our application. Haha, that's fun to say. So I'm gonna have a family component of some sort. The family is just an arbitrary term. It doesn't matter what this is. Whose job is going to be to feed our information to person. So now we got to go create family. Okay, let's go do that. Same thing, we'll just make it a stateless functional component. And family's only job, if I can spell it properly, is to return person and pass down that person data. And potentially we would have multiple people here. We could pass the data down, but you're starting to see this pattern where I kind of have this thing set up in my application. If I look at my React Dev Tools, it'll illustrate it perfectly for me, where family's purpose, the only purpose that family is providing, is to return our person component and simply just pass it some data, right? I don't have this stuff set up, so I need to go name equals props.name. So you already saw the problem here equals props.age. You see the problem where I was trying to pass this down and simply all of a sudden at my bottom level component, I have my app, which holds my data, and then I have my family, which takes that data in and simply returns a person with that data. Now, this is not the only reason that the React or the Context API is good, is to offset this problem. In fact, the documentation for from React, the React team tells us that this is not the only reason you should use the Context API. However, it does solve this problem. Person or family has no business basically being in our application as a data provider to person. We want family to just be its own separate thing, right? Potentially, like I said, it would be like a list that we pass data to and then supply that data to a person or whatever. But for now, it's really just kind of a middleman component that's doing nothing but supplying information to our person component. Okay, so how does the Context API actually fix this? Well, we use the Context API in this thing that I like to refer to as composed state. So in a React application, you normally have your component state. If you use Redux, you have your application state. With the Context API, we use this thing that I like to call a composed state, where we say, hey, let's build a component whose sole purpose is to just hold on to some data and then pass that data to as many components that we want to subscribe to it as we want. And we can sort of build our application in this way that we compose our components together, and we also compose our contexts, okay? So this is what we're gonna do. We're gonna create a new folder called contexts. Context is gonna have a, we're just gonna call it our family context for now, okay? And this is where like the fun starts to begin with it. This is where we start to get excited about it, okay? Well, this is where I get excited about it. So I'm gonna import in React, and I'm gonna call for I'm gonna create a new context, okay? So I'm gonna say, and I'm just gonna export this context so that we can use it in other parts of our application, wherever we want, okay? This is what's gonna be super cool. So I'm gonna say export, a constant variable to our family context, and set that equal to React.create, not element, context, okay? And you need to supply it with some base information. Really, an empty object will suffice because we're gonna put things on state that belong here on state, okay? It's gonna be super cool. So now, there are two components that come from the React context function. If I were to log this out, we're not gonna do that now because I don't have much time. You would see that there is a provider component and a consumer component, okay? So the first thing that we're gonna build is our family provider. Okay, so I'm going to say class family provider extends our React.component class because we want this to hold on to some state. Okay, so just like normal, we need to render something if we're extending our component. Okay, and that returns some sort of div. So for now, or some sort of DOM element. For now, we're just going to call it div that says family provider. Cool? Okay, that's not all we need to do here. We need to actually return this information here as our family context provider. Okay? So this is how this is going to work. Every single thing that we wrap this family context in, oops. Come on. Dot provider is going to be rendered out by the children. Okay? So any children that we give this provider, or that we wrap around our family provider, will have access to our context. That's the beauty of this. So when we use this, we're going to wrap this component around our other components, and then we're going to consume that with our consumer. Okay? So we're going to export this as the default, because we're going to need that. Not family context, family provider. So notice we're exporting two things out of this file. One of them is the default object. The other one is simply just a constant variable, okay? The family context. So we're subscribing to this thing here. Sorry. This should be called, I did this wrong. This should be called family context. There we go. That's going to make a lot more sense. So now this is the component that's going to control the state for all of our application that we want this component to be involved with. So if we're creating some sort of family, a bunch of data or whatever, family is a terrible name for this. I already hate this example, but it's what I'm going with. We're going to actually take this state and we're going to remove it and watch, because Freddy, we're actually going to, a lot of this is going to just stop working. And let's see. Okay, we're just undefined. That's great. Awesome, our data does not exist anymore. So let's go to our family context, and inside of our provider, what we're going to do is set up our state to be used this way, okay? So now our state can be set here on our family provider. So there's one prop that the provider takes, and that prop is the value, which is going to be the data that's going to pass down to any of our components. Okay, in this case, we just want to send down all of the state. Okay, pretty simple, nothing crazy here. We're just going to have a prop on our provider called value. And the kicker is going to be how we access that state data in just a minute. Okay, so what we need to do now is go back over to our app.js file, and we're going to wrap our provider around that family component. So inside of here, I can say family provider needs to wrap that component, and of course, I need to import it from contexts/family context. Oh, family context.js is not famil provider. Okay, let's see where that is.
You misspelled family provider.
Did I misspell it inside of my
23.
family context?
Line 23 in family context.
Family line 23. Oh, cool. Awesome. Thank you. Whoever that was, you get 12 points for Gryffindor. Okay, cool. So let's move forward and look at what happened to our application. So what is going on under the hood now? So we wrapped our family inside of this context. So look, our family provider is providing context for us. And look at the information that's available for us on value. Name, Freddie, age 32. Okay, so this is great and all. And then remember, family just simply returns person. So we actually can circumnavigate family now. Because all of this data, all of our children inside of this tree, inside of this family provider, can consume this data wherever we want them to from here on out. Okay, so we have composed our state. All of the components that we need to have access to our state can be found inside of that provider. And this can get as deep and as many providers nested as you would like, which is sort of the cool part about it. So let's go back over to our person and let's consume this data with our person. Okay, so here we're going to go. We're going to say import family context. Notice that's the non-default object from contexts, family context. Cool. And the last piece of this puzzle, family context.consumer, is to wrap our data in a consumer. Now, you're going to get this nasty error a lot when you're playing around with this, okay? Because it's saying now render is not a function. There's a problem with this. It's because this does not behave the same way as you would expect it to, where it's like, oh, props dot blah, blah, blah. We're not getting them through props anymore. If I look, let me comment this out. That's not going to work. Let me just go back real quick. If I look, this is a piece that I should have mentioned earlier, where React is defined inside, or where our component is defined. Notice there's no props. Okay, they are found on the content provider or in the context provider. Okay, so our context provider has those props, but it doesn't know how to give them to any of these until we explicitly tell it. Okay, so how we do that is, once again, let's go back to wrapping our component up in our consumer. And let's say that we're now going to use this really interesting method called a render prop. So remember, in JSX, you can write your JavaScript inline, right? Because this is not just HTML; it's JSX, right? It's JavaScript like HTML or HTML like JavaScript. So because of that, we can actually write a function. And a lot of people write this function and they say, this is going to be our context. For me, I like to say this is the data that I'm concerned with here. Somebody can refute me on that, and that's fine. I have no qualms, chatting about that at length. It's super fun for me to chat about why I would call something a certain way. And notice now that let's see if anything changed at this point. Person is now wrapped by the consumer, but we still don't have access to our data quite yet. Okay, although we do, we just have to figure out how to use it. So what I'm going to do is I want to actually console log our data so you can see it. So I'm going to wrap this in a function block. And before I return, I'm going to console.log our data. And we'll see what's available for us. Notice that all of a sudden, whatever comes through this render prop function, whatever gets spit out here, okay, when this function gets invoked, data is our value that we set on the provider. So wherever your consumer is, data becomes the value that you set on your provider. Let's do that one more time side by side. Okay, so wherever your consumer is, this function, you can call this whatever you want. You can call it context, you can call it foobar. I don't care. I like data because I am passing data down to my application. Okay, and this is where things start to get really cool. Because now I just have to say data.name as opposed to props and data.age, and then I don't even need this anymore. And if you notice, we are, hello, my name is Freddie, and I am 32 years old. Now, this is a super trivial application, okay? This is really, really simple and straightforward. The kicker is, that's really cool, I can go back to my app now, and I can say that I want to wrap all of my stuff. Let's just go everything inside of this div goes inside of the family provider now. Cool? So I can not only consume, so notice that here I'm passing family in, and then family returns, of course, our person. I don't even need this stuff anymore. Look at this. This is what's so great. I'm just composing my state as I'm composing my app, right? And then person gets returned as that context. So we can go and we can say, app, what if I want to say that I want to change this title to whatever is on our context. Let's go back to family context. That's why I hate this name, because it wasn't very reusable. And let's say that title is now going to be welcome to the context. Okay? Remember, where we are consuming this data is all the way down at person, the person component. Okay, let's consume that data up at app. Since we're wrapping this all in a family provider, let's wrap this H1 in a family context consumer. So I need to pull in my family context, and I need to wrap it up. Okay? Here comes that nasty error. Render is not a thing. Invalid, blah, 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 blah. Okay? So we have to actually make it work. To do that, you use this advanced JavaScript, or not JavaScript, but React technique called a render prop. And we're just going to render out our data, returning that H1, and we're going to say data.title is our new string of information. What have I done wrong? Element type is invalid. Sorry, was somebody going to speak?
Should it be family context.consume in 1315?
Yes. Oh my goodness, what a total derp. Okay, consumer, there we go. That should work. Welcome to the context. Okay, we have two places in our application that we are now consuming this data. And any of our other components, we could make as many components as we want that could either consume this data or be standalone components as they are. Now, once again, this is such a trivial application that it doesn't really set the tone. I could do another brown bag on this where we extend this to have multiple contexts. And I could also deploy an app that I've been building and playing around with that is consuming these contexts. But I wanted to make sure that we got the basics of what's going on here. So the idea is that we create a context and we basically return out of that context a provider. And that provider is going to take care of our state for us from here on out. And any other things that we want, like methods, like say hello, can live on this constructor. And it's just going to alert, hello, I am, and then we will interpolate. Actually, we'll just keep it simple. We'll just say hello. I was going to say I'm Freddie, but who cares? And I can pass that down as my data as well. Now things start to get a little bit tricky here. Okay, This is where I like to sort of follow sort of a Flux style-esque paradigm, where I say my state is going to be this function here, and then my actions will be say hello or whatever. An object that is say hello equals this dot say hello. Cool. And then let's see. Now you can see our contexts have changed. So we need to look at the shape. Now notice that our values are different. So state is age, name, and title. So we need to go fix that wherever we're consuming it. So we need to say data.state.title and then data.state.name inside of person. Or we just destructure data, whatever, destructure state. But in this case, we'll just say state and state. And we're back to our original project, but now we have this cool little function as an action that we can dispatch or call. It's not really a dispatch, but we can call wherever we want. I have, it's undefined, so let me make sure that I can use it because I wanted to get through this piece, this.sayHello. Okay, and then we will, now we should refresh the app. Action say hello as a function, and I could use that anywhere I want. So inside of my app.js, I will make a button that consumes this. And I'm going to wrap this in a function block so that I can return. And I'm going to just return, I could wrap this all in a div, or there's this cool new thing called the React.Fragment, which allows you to write sibling elements. Okay, and instead of that div being put on the screen, and have a button that on clicks the call to data.actions dot say hello. Data is my object, actions is my sub object, say hello is that function. And if this works, I might have to, it worked. Cool. So now you're starting to think, oh, how would you organize your state in your application? Well, any data that I need could just be put on an object called state. Any actions or items, functions that I need, or helpers or whatever, could be on actions or functions. It's kind of just a fun thing. Okay. Looks like a couple of questions came in, but it looks like they were just helping me. So would you still use set state to update the state and family provider? Yes. In this case, we would, right? Because that's where the state lives, okay? If you were to wire up a provider through Redux, haven't thought about it that far yet. But yes, in my other app that I can deploy as well to Code Sandbox, it actually has examples of multiple contexts being consumed, and it has examples of state being updated using set state. So yes, this doesn't get rid of set state. You want to still use set state to update your data. Yep. So if this was going to go and set the state or toggle some function here or something, yeah, that's what we would want to do there. Cool. Any other questions? Okay, that looks like there's a couple more. Redux haters shakes head. Cool. So you don't need to render. You still need to render if you're inside of a React component. Okay. Sounds like the Redux state object is just migrated into React as its own component. Pretty much. And the cool thing about that, Sean, is that React has had this React.Context API for a long time. It just hasn't been very stable. And so Redux, React Redux, that package that we use, the provider component in Redux, is basically using the context API under the hood. That's how Redux actually works with React. And other libraries like MobX and UI components, or what do they call those? The component library. The React component library that's really popular, the CSS in JS library. Anyway, that uses, the one that Max Stoiber built uses it as well. So yeah, but it's less obtrusive or intrusive to your application to go out and pull in a bunch of actions, reducers, and things like that. You can just compose your state in this way where you're like, oh, I'm just going to have a function whose only purpose is to hold on to state. And then anywhere in my application, as far nested down the state tree or down the application tree as I want, I can consume that data. So it's really, really cool. Definitely no hating on Redux. There is definitely a time and place where Redux is still important. Looks like a lot of questions came in that I didn't see, but that's fine. What do you see as the benefits of Redux over context and context over Redux? One is bigger over the other. Redux is more suited for larger development teams and larger applications. There, in my opinion, the Ryan of yesteryear would have told you that there are a very, very small percentage of applications using Redux who actually need it. Like less than 1%. That was just my opinion, because I thought that the state management system that React came with was already so great. And now it's even better. So my hope is that people will reach for Redux less and use the Context API more for things like, that your application state needs to share across components. So one of the key examples that the React team provides is using themes. So let's say that you wanted to like think about your Reddit themes on your subreddits that you frequent every day during class when I'm boring you to death. You go and you can change your theme as a mod. You can go and say, this is going to be a red thread. Everything else looks virtually the same, but you can go click a button and it goes and changes that to a different color, right? That's one really, really good use case for the Context API. Think about that in terms of React and in terms of code and how complicated theming would be without it, right? Yes, and then there is the fragment syntax where you could just, you don't have to use that. Thank you. Styled components was the library I was looking for. Can you offer an example on how to update the provider state? I don't want to cut into everyone's afternoon, but that's not super hard. So I can just say toggle bool. This is going to be the best example of your life because it's going to be so practical. And we're going to say this.setState, and we're going to have some item that is going to be the opposite of this.state.some item. Okay, so that's all we're going to do. Some item's going to live up here, and we're going to say some item is false. We're going to pass this down, much like we're doing in say hello, toggle bool equals this dot toggle bool. Okay. Now in in one of our components, we'll just go to this and we'll say button is going to toggle bool. And since we're passing that state down as well, we already have it on data. So here we go. We're going to say on click. You're looking at Ryan, who's thinking faster than he can talk, which is not always the case. On click, trigger a function that is going to be data.actions.toggleBool and toggle it up. And now we'll have a ternary here that says, so if we have data.someItem, data.state.someItem, okay, don't forget that, is if that's true, then say, yeah, Jean. Else, we'll say, bye-bye for now. Cool? So bye-bye for now, it's false. If I toggle it back and forth, and look at my state changing all over my screen here. Whoa. Bump that down, bump that back up, because that's cool. Cool? So every time we toggle, that action is calling that toggle bool function down here, and it's updating that some item, right? And just a simple, trivial application. You could think about this now in terms of your to-do lists that you build, right? Super easy to just go right into your context, manage your state in one place, and then anywhere throughout your application you want to consume that state, you just ensure that you are using the context consumer. And you could build as many of these contexts as you want. So that's one thing that's awesome. You could start thinking about your context as your composed state. And that's a term that I want it to stick, is composed or compositional state. Context is stable enough for use in production. Yes. It is released with the React 16.3. It is no longer a low-level API. It's actually up, on the spec. All right, gang, I'm going to deploy this up to Code Sandbox and get you an example. Say yes to that. And then I'll get you an example of a little bit larger application that sort of has a little to-do list involved in it and some other state. And it's really just me playing around with things now. Okay. Sorry about that, Troy. Well, now you know. The idea is you could potentially start using this in your apps that you're building. So there's the first one. And then let me get this other one deployed and get you the second one. The second one is a little bit more, there's a little bit more stuff going on. And of course, there's a bug in my second one. So my second one looks a lot like this. You're going to see similar examples, because me coming up with examples it's like pulling teeth. But if you notice, I have like a to-do list. If I log in, I can say, hello, I'm Freddie, I'm 32 years old. I can log out, things like that. These are 3 different contexts. Okay, I have 3 different contexts in my application. If you look, family, to-do, 2 contexts. I thought I had a login context as well somewhere, but I didn't build it yet. Now that's going to break. Cool. So you should have those changes. Okay. All right. Any other questions? I hope you enjoyed this presentation. I'm going to try and make my presentation go a little smoother tonight at Utah.js, but thanks for being my guinea pigs. If you have any questions, or if you ever just want to talk about React in general, I'm always here to lend an ear. You know it's my passion. It's the one thing that I love the most right now that I work in, and it's by far my favorite thing to teach. Have a great afternoon and get back to work.